Why, hello, hello. It has been a while. Sorry about the missing stream last week. Had a bit of a family matter come up, but nothing serious. And we're back to the old grind, the beginning of it all. And I thought Mermaid took a long time to make. This comic is a little bigger than the last one. How is everybody doing? My week has been rough being sick. Thankfully, I felt well enough today to attend the stream. So, hopefully my voice doesn't sound weird. But let's get going. So, this will be the first time I'm ever sharing the beginning stages of a comic with you all. And I think it would be a fun learning experience to not only see the process behind a comic's creation, but also, I don't know, maybe we can learn a little bit from each other. Right, so this is my new comic. It is very kind of similar to the last one I made, where our characters, Clay and Alistair, must go up against a new villain persona. Except in this one, we meet a character that has never been on the channel as of now, or even showcased in any of my art. He has a test name right now, as most of my characters don't get a name until the final drafts and such. So we're going to call him Rob for short, or Robert. What you see behind you right now is an enlarged version of the thumbnail storyboard. Before I ever make a comic, I almost always give a really rough idea of what I want the page to look like. We do this so that we can add text. Word of advice: never put text down on a page before you have some idea what the page looks like. I even might rearrange these speech bubbles as they stand now. But that's why we test it early on. Now that I have some idea where I want the characters' speech bubbles to go, as well as the panels, now we can begin adding the sketches. So let's jump right into that. It's just going to be a bit of a chill, slow stream today. My dog is joining us again. It has been very windy where we are today, so I cannot guarantee he won't bark. I swear, sometimes this guy will bark at a leaf. Oh, speaking of which, I'll be right back. I got to let him out. Scratch that. The dog has now left us. We are now free to conduct whatever we want now on our comic page. I try and be pretty loose when it comes to these early pages, as a lot of this probably isn't going to stay. And in fairness, sketches aren't really made to be pretty. I mean, you can make them really pretty. I just kind of use mine as a baseline for what I would want to do with the line art afterwards. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You don't immediately throw down line art as soon as you're done sketching. At least this is how I make a comic page. I like to have every single page of a mini short sketched out before I do any line art. This is because mostly art style consistency. If you are also an artist, you might understand this, but art, as you grow older and learn, will begin to change slightly, even if not by much. And these shifts in the art style can be seen both in art that you made a long time ago, or especially in comics, where if you were to look back at old pages, you'll see where some look different than those that had just came out. And one way I've learned to avoid that is to draw out the entire mini comic in sketch form and then do the line art all in one go. That way, at least the pages themselves look consistent and not several weeks between them. I hope that makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about Robert, or as I know him, Robodad. He falls in line of one of my more goofy style villains for the Ivar collection. I had this big envisionment a long time ago of having a large roster of characters of which I can have Ivar interact with over a series of comics. And while I do still plan on introducing us to very many entertaining villains, I don't nearly have as much as I used to. Mainly because I realized I am a single person making multiple comics. I had to kind of pick and choose which ones I would prefer to draw and which stories I believe were worth telling. It's kind of like the old saying goes, you have to be a little harsh with your darlings. I might love them, they might bring me a lot of joy, but when it comes to prioritizing who makes it into the story, that is where we must make difficult decisions. Robodad, or Robert, had made the cut into my villains collection on the grounds that I find him not only really entertaining, but also a heartfelt and deep story that kind of balances out his more goofy narrative when it comes to his shenanigans. That's really crooked, let's fix that. A good example of this would be his line. Well, because every villain has a motive. Every villain wants to accomplish something. The greatest villains believe that they are doing some right by interfering with the world or keeping others from doing so. So think of it like an anti-hero. Now, there are some villains in movies and shows that are just written off for laughs and are kind of just used to bring a smile on your face when they're not being serious. Villains like this would be like in the movie Shrek with Lord Farquaad. He's not necessarily the villain you take seriously. Robodad was that to me. Robert is not necessarily a villain that you take serious up front, as his wish was to create an intelligent AI, a robot capable of human thought and reasoning ability that he may or may not have wanted to turn into some type of force against the people of Hope Harbor. And I know up front that probably sounds as if, it's a good word, that's a truly compelling and terrifying villain, like robots taking over the world. He thought so too. But it turns out the technology is a bit beyond its years, and while he can, and has, made these intelligent robots, for an undisclosed reason, as I don't even know, truly, they are stuck with the intelligence of maybe a toddler, rather than a full-grown adult. Hence the name Robodad. He has this massed army of robots that he can get to do whatever he wants, but they get distracted easily by butterflies and picnics and wanting to play with toys. And that's what makes him comical to me. A bit of relief compared to some of the other villains, who are a bit more imposing and actually sharing attributes of Clay or Alistair that makes it difficult for them to confront them without confronting an internal conflict inside themselves. But I think where Robert gets interesting is why, or rather, what happened to him after he started obsessing and creating these androids. And that is where a true story behind him is. Because it was this obsession that near drove him mad, and while he may have found some success, he's constantly still pushing for new ideas and new innovations as he finds that he's not satisfied. Because it's not really what he wants. Okay, let's check his reference. I brought up a few photos from my old concepts. And I need to check his hair. Because for whatever reason, I cannot remember what the hair looks like on some of my characters. Anyone else have that problem? I can remember the structures of my characters relatively well, but for whatever reason, I cannot remember the style of a character's hair. Okay, so just two down, then the middle. And you're probably going to notice that these are pretty sloppy. And like I said, I don't necessarily aim for perfection when I make these little pages. They just help me to get a baseline of what I want from the page, or rather the story. I'll probably come back and fix that. That's the sketch for you. But yeah, Robert, or Rob, whatever you want to call him, he doesn't work alone. He has an assistant you may have saw in the reference photos I brought up. His name is Theodore, or I call him Ted for short. Yeah, I think he, too, also plays a pretty big role in Rob's life and the creation of the robots. Is while he may have not helped invent them, he did watch firsthand what the pursuit of this knowledge did to his old friend. And honestly, I think it's kind of sweet that he stuck around all this time. I love how I draw goggles. I never truly understand sometimes how to draw them, so I always just kind of throw things together and hope they make sense. Same goes for face shapes. I try and give each character a unique face shape, both to give them a bit of separation from the rest of the cast, but as well to help with personality showcasing. But for whatever reason, I don't initially sometimes draw it on the sketch. I mean, you might see a shape or two, but it's more drastic when it comes to the line art. Honestly, I think it kind of circles back to the whole not trying to be perfect thing. It probably gets old hearing, but it is true. When you make a comic page, you're not trying to make it look perfect yet. A lot of these sketches I'm going to come back and adjust a lot, just to make sure I get what I want from the image. Hence why we began in a sketch in the first place. I cannot even begin to express how much nicer it is to not have the ads bother us during stream. Both in just drawing alone and with you guys. It has truly made this more of an enjoyable experience for me. I hope it has brought some entertainment for you as well. Yeah, not a lot's going on when it comes to sketches. I mean, I personally think it's a bit more entertaining to watch me fail to draw a line over and over again than it is to draw line art where I already kind of have an idea what I want. But yeah, I find this rather fun to do. It's something I rather enjoy. Okay, now you might notice I didn't do the background on this page. Well, mainly for one, it's a sketch, and two, I don't know yet if I want to do the background. Because note up here at the top, this is a lot more detailed than the one down here. Well, I found that, for one, trying to cram a lot of background into a small panel kind of makes the space look cluttered. But I also found out there's easier ways to make the background look filled without having to do any of the unnecessary detail. And that will be through painting. And I can't really do that in Sketch, so I just kind of leave it blank as a reminder. Now this is going to be interesting. We have to redraw the initial frame. Not to its completion, but something that resembles it. Now, for those who might be wondering why I went through the effort to draw all these sketches when there's technically a really rough sketch on the other side of this, where you can see in the storyboard. One reason why I'm doing this is because the storyboard, words today. The storyboard is meant to just get an idea, while the sketches are actually testing that idea and seeing if it works. This is why I do both. Because if I was to only do the sketches by themselves, I could sit here for hours just dotting out ideas until I find one that I liked. Whereas I can do it in a much looser, rough style, say for the thumbnails, and get already a foundation before I put sketches down. It doesn't mean the sketches are not going to change, but it leaves a little less work on me. I don't really know where to put these binoculars, so we're just gonna lay them down there. Let's take a look. I think I'm gonna move them over. Whoa. Oh, okay, so I accidentally drew on the frame. This happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly outline it, and I'm going to copy it. So I can make a copy of what I had, and then we're going to go back and get rid of the sketch, because I kind of need that box. It takes a long time to make a panel on Procreate, mainly because it doesn't have a panel feature. So I do not want to lose that panel. And there we go. With copy and paste, we have returned. Actually, now with copy and paste, I can actually adjust it to be more accurate. I actually don't remember if he wears gloves. Been kind of drawing them off without checking. He does. He does wear gloves. I think I would prefer the bush to be more in the panel, but I think I'll fix that later. I think we'll just go with that sketch. Alright, time to draw Ted. Ted is the big guy in the corner chasing the little robot. I kept most of the designs fairly simple, his included. So I'm gonna have to try and replicate this now in sketches. What you see up there is actually the old draft of the comic. I had this idea maybe a couple months ago, and it was originally intended to be one of the first mini comics I ever did. Fast forward a couple of months, and it actually never happened. I never made it. But it was shortly after the completion of my mermaid comic that I came back and found these guys. So don't be afraid to pull out those old ideas. If you have a project that never truly came to be, it doesn't mean you have to throw it away and give up on it. This idea didn't work out at the time, But now I can bring it back and it looks better than it did the first time. Honestly, sometimes a story just needs time. I think it's when we push ourselves to create something just for the sake of it. We're not truly creating something that we enjoy, something that we want to create. And I never want to put myself in a position where I'm creating something for someone else or creating something for the sake of creating. You need to truly want to create a comic for it to resonate with you, to love it. You need to truly want to create it. Which is why I highly encourage, if you have a comic idea, to do the comic that you want, not the comic you think that's going to get a lot of views or a lot of people are going to love. Because while, yes, you do have to consider some audiences when it comes to storytelling, you're the person that's going to have to draw this comic over and over and over again. I think I'd much rather have a story that brings me joy as well as an audience than a story that brings audience attention, but nothing for me. Kind of need to turn his head, but I don't have the means of doing so in a sketch, so we're just going to kind of mimic it by doing some slanting. There we go. Now time to draw Rob again. So I got a question earlier today about the world of Ivar. More importantly, people wondering what it was all about. And while I do agree with the idea and impressions that I've seen people get where it is a superhero story, that is very much true. Something that I want the people to understand is, while this is a superhero comic, it is actually more of a telling of real-world struggle. That was kind of the whole reason I created it. I loved superheroes. I loved the concept of characters saving the day and being brave and heroic. But something I didn't see when it came to people telling these stories, typically, not all. There's some really good comics out there. But what I notice is you either have one or two types of stories. You either have they're out to fight the bad guy and that's their entire thing, superhero, where it's just good versus evil. Or you have a hero type character who makes out to have a realistic struggle, but they still have something to do with powers, like where they have to go to war inside themselves of whether or not they're good or evil, or the bad guy makes them question everything they ever knew, stuff like that. And while I do agree those are interesting stories, for me, they never really hit the mark to what I would consider a relatable hero. And that got me thinking about those heroes always don't wear capes saying. And in this case, I tried to capture that in Ivar, where, yes, it's very much like a superhero story where it's good versus evil and there's bad guys that need to be stopped. But these bad guys aren't just black and white characters. They're kind of gray. They had reasons for the way the way they act. They have backstories that built the character we see now. They've been through struggles. And the same goes for the hero. He's not openly heroic and... what's a good way to say this? He's not perfect. Yeah, I think that's a good way. He's not perfect. And I think a big problem with heroes in modern day portrayal is we either paint them as overly human or overly good, when really it's kind of a middle ground. Because true, not everybody is going to have the courage it takes to stand up to someone, especially in a physical fight sense. But at the same time, nobody is excused from having their smaller issues. And that's what Ivar was to me. It's a personal story of mine, of me sharing not only my own struggles through the characters, but as well as showcasing the good and bad in the world. So that's pretty much the overall theme of Ivar. Robo-Dad here is a great example of it, with his obsession in the scientific world. It kind of driven him to a point where now he's searching for something he physically cannot find or cannot have because of the path he took, but he's not willing to accept that. Now, about the physical world of Ivar, it's heavily inspired off of... you could say Zootopia was an inspiration, but I think it would be very, very loose. A lot of it actually came from the movie Kung Fu Panda, as well as other comics that for whatever reason I can't remember the name right now. But yeah, these stories shaped Ivar into this kind of real-life comic strip where a character is going through his everyday life very unhappy with how things are. And that's kind of where Clay's been put. In this position of making a decision he's not really all that sure he even wants. Now, you might be wondering, how does Alistair and Mermaid fit in this universe when there seems to be human-like characters and then not human-like characters? Well, buckle in, we're about to go on a biology lesson. In the world of Hope Harbor, there are several species of humans. The type you see here with Rob and Ted are what we recognize as human, the actual normalcy of the characters. And normal sounds wrong as we go in, but that is kind of true. They're what we recognize as human. When there's a second category called fauna. Fauna is based off of the scientific word for animal. And in this world, when you are a fauna, it basically means you are a human with the attributes of an animal. Now, it's very important, or at least I believe it's important in the story and through my own eyes, is that it's very important to note that these people are not animals. They might look like one, they might share the skills such as flight or even swimming ability of one, but they never were or should be considered an animal, as doing such would be considered offensive. They have always been human. Now, I don't really know how historically it works, but personally I believe that they were always humans, just like the humans were always humans. And it's just kind of a development of some were given flight abilities, others were given large claws, and few had hardly changed at all, with small exceptions like fur or large ears. But I'm getting a little carried away. The main thing you need to know is that the town of Hope Harbor is where everybody resides and is considered a city of peace, or a foundation of it. Of course, as any great story goes, something must disturb the peace, and I think that's really where the story picks up. Ivar begins in the trying times of this city. Peace was its foundation, but presently, everybody's struggling with something, and the place has never been more at its wit's end than it has been now. a great division, if you will. Faunas, the people, animals, they have found themselves kind of neglected and pushed to the edge of society. Whereas the people like Rob and Ted here are considered more in power, more in charge, if that makes sense. They have a larger influence on what goes on in the city, mainly because of their status. Yeah, that's pretty much the baseline of the fauna. How many fauna are there? There are... I don't know. Let's see. I know there's a cat fauna. There's a canine or dog fauna. There's a rabbit, so that would make 3. There is a bear fauna, which would make 4. And there's aquatic. I think there might be 6 or 7. Because there's like a species that I haven't quite focused in on that's based off the goat. But I haven't really done a lot of lore building around them, so I kind of neglected the species up till now. So there might be a goat, there might not be. We'll see. Yeah, we'll say there's 6 or 7 species of fauna. I could go into an entire diagram about how the system of the city runs, and personally, I don't think that's everybody's interest. I seem to notice a lot of world building. Some people really love the characters, while other people seem to like the world more than the characters, and I think this affects the way the story is created. I have never been able to quite decipher what I would be considered in storytelling. Do I like lore more than I like the characters, or am I in love with the characters? Personally, I think both can't live without the other. So maybe I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't think people realize how much a character can change a story simply by existing. And that might sound weird, but I am a firm believer in this idea that your character can rewrite his entire story. And I know, they're not real. They're something you created in your head and put on paper and brought to life through drawing them. But sometimes it feels like if you have a character with true depth and emotion, it feels as if they write themselves some days. That they created themselves, almost. Of course, at the end of the day, you always have the final word. But for whatever reason, these guys, to me, I've kind of just let them create themselves. To truly be what they want to be. And as a result, as I build off of Rob, for example, as I built off his history and what created him, as well as understanding why he did it, the story changed. He wasn't that psychopathic, silly side gag of a character that he used to be, but instead he turned into one of the most important characters, I think, in the entire collection. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? My sister told me the other day that she likes characters when it comes to creating. Her biggest struggle is the world. But here's a little advice on building a world for your characters. Is if you don't know yet how your world is meant to look like, or how the system works, or how it's even meant to be structured, don't worry about it. I would focus on the character first and let them build out their world. Like, example, Alistair, I always wanted him to be some form of human with animal attributes. My first thought was going to be a wolf, but then I scrapped that. And eventually I landed on the bird. I really wanted him to have the ability to fly. And as a result, naturally, I knew I needed to make a world of which would allow him not just to have the wings, but would also make sense for him to be a bird amongst all these normal-looking humans. And I think that is how character and world building complement each other. Oh boy, I gotta draw all these little robots. I think I'm gonna be pretty light on their detail though, just a couple squares. This is what I meant when I said that this might be one of the larger projects I've made. I don't have the pleasure of using like a 3D software to replicate the same model over and over again. I have to draw it by hand. Such is life. I'm actually not sure how many robots Rob has in his possession. I estimated close to 1,000, but I obviously never going to draw 1,000 little cubes. Personally, I feel like if you would take the time to draw all those individual little squares, you would probably be driven to a point of insanity. I'm gonna slowly begin tapering off here in the back so I don't have to draw all of them. Now we're just gonna do little lines for the body. Yeah, that'll work. We'll do all the detail on the robots later. So that should be page 1 sketches. Now let's check our speech bubbles. It's at this point I determine whether or not the speech bubbles need to be shrunk, grown bigger to help fit the page, or need to be moved entirely if it's not getting the story across. I think I'll change this one right here in the middle, but not by much. I think I just want it a little bit smaller. Move it up. The goal is to try and make an S shape, I heard, when it comes to making comics. You want to kind of have this flow. Yeah, I think it achieves that. So yeah, that will be page 1. Now I will be right back. I think there is a cat scratching on the door. He didn't want to come in. Isn't that just a cat, though, to want to scratch on the door, and then as soon as you get there, they're gone? Alright, let's move to page 2. I have a big problem with page 2. And you might already be able to see it. Those speech bubbles are really big. The only problem is, I can't fix them yet. I have to wait and see what they look like with the sketches. Because I really don't know where they're supposed to be until I have the sketches. Fun fact, every single one of these robot children has a name. Now, I haven't named every single one, but I truly do believe, in spite Rob's belief, that these are, of course, just products of the machine, things of which he wants to use to conquer Hope Harbor. I do truly believe that he had named every single one of these robots something unique. Now, I don't actually know how to draw robots all that well, so I just kept them very simple. Almost hilariously simple. They look like an old TV screen. Does anybody remember what TV looked like that, or am I just old? I grew up with the box TV. A little bit. We did get a regular, kind of thin, flat TV later in my life, but for the longest time, I had a box TV. I was probably one of the only people in my class that knew what a box TV was. But I suppose that just happens sometimes. Honestly, I quite enjoy the older things in life. Like older music, older products. I don't know. Something about it had charm, where nowadays it's more of a make money quest. But I'm not going to get into all that. That's a story for another day. I don't know if anyone else here keeps up with it, but I had just now seen the... But yes, the one with the antennas. Yeah, those are the kind of box TVs I've seen. Though I don't know if mine had an antenna. It's been a long time since I've seen it. I was, like, really small, too. That should do it for the robot entourage. Yeah, what was I getting into? Oh, yeah. I had recently just got to see that new chapter for Poppy Playtime. Now, I have no way of playing the game myself, so I always have to wait for it to come out. I don't know. I just thought I'd share that. My opinions are still kind of in the air. I haven't quite decided how I felt about it. But I do know one thing. It sucks to be left on another cliffhanger. I will say that. That's all I'll say on it. No one else has seen it yet. But honestly, I kind of expected it, to be fair. Okay, time to draw the next panel. Kind of a little bit of trivia here. I believe the robot that is currently is currently on screen right now. I believe his name is Cal. Robert actually does, in fact, have a favorite. I will admit that. He does pick favorites. But I never figured out who it was. Out of all the robots I've drawn for him, both in the design concept and in the comic, I've never figured out which one was his favorite. But I know he has one, because I have an episode planned where we discuss that robot of his. Oh yes, that was very entertaining. Okay, now time to draw even more random robots. Yeah, I have an episode planned where we discuss that robot in particular. Yeah, I have a short where I discuss this robot in particular, but I'm not really, I'm not sure who it is or what his name was. I know I talked about it with my sister once. She actually helps me create a lot of these stories. Something to consider in the future, I suppose. If I ever have an entire record of these robots' names, I'll make sure to share it. Well, that's a good question, Skycraft. I'm not really sure. I think it has something to do with his history with the robots. Personally, I always voted that it was probably the first successful one, so he kind of treats it with favor over the others that were all built off its design. That was my running theory. And it sounds weird to have a theory for a story, but I kind of think it's fun to think of them that way, where I don't have a set idea, so I just kind of toss things into the air. And that was the one I settled on for the robot he enjoys, as I think it may have been the first one. But yeah, I have no idea who it is out of all the other robots, because they all look the same. Partially because I can't be bothered to design all the robots. And two, just in general, just makes it easier to replicate them over and over again when they just have a simple box design. A couple of these guys were designed, however, for different jobs. Well, the basic are probably going to look like what you see on screen here, where they'll have these little pinchy claws and square heads. Some of their claws have been traded out for tools, like he has mechanic robots to fix more robots. It's a weird thing. But since he lacks the ability to have more henchmen like Ted, he's designed his robots to kind of fill in those roles. Yeah, we probably won't see any of them in this short, though, as this is the first time I'm really going to be drawing them in a full color. So I'm going to try and keep things pretty simple. One of the things I struggled with, though, is giving them expressions. Because one thing I'm trying to remember, while they were built to be intelligent AI, they weren't exactly designed to have a human emotion. But at the same time, they do possess anger, happiness, fear, excitement, and all that stuff. So I think a lot of it has to rely on the eyes. I just haven't worked that out yet either. But you know, this is... Actually, that's a pretty good idea, Skycraft. I never thought about that he would possess something that quality the others did not. That might be another reason why he enjoys it. This is what I love about early characters. There's still a lot you can change about them, and that's one reason why I made these mini-comics, so that I could truly unravel what these characters were about without having to quite yet go into the main stories. Because if I went in now, I wouldn't really know what to do with all these robots and what they truly mean to Robert as it stands. But yeah, that's an interesting idea. I'll have to think about that. And I think I'm just going to doodle these back ones here, as I'm not really wanting to draw all the detail right now. Okay, now time to draw Rob. Now, I'm not someone to go out and say that I have a character I prefer over the other. While there are some that I do prefer to draw, and some that I think have more fleshed out stories than others, I do think, though, that these guys, Ted, Rob, and the robots, I do think they've taken a spot in my definitely top 10 characters for the collection. And I think that some of this has to do with the story. I'm quite proud of how it's turned out so far and with my very rough writing. But 2, I think they have a genuine connection to our main character, Ivar, that a lot of the villains don't have yet. I try and aim when I create a villain for Ivar for them to have something that Clay can take away from, whether it be a negative or a positive thing about them. In Robodad's case, I think it's a little bit of both, where there's a positive lesson to be taken from his obsession and where it put him, but a negative as well in this constant pursuit instead of actually confronting the real problem in his life. And something about that just kind of resonated not only with me, but just truly felt it fit Clay's story. And I think that's what truly dictates to me what if a character is of value. That's a good idea too, having them be older model. For whatever reason, my stream is lagging a bit, so I just now got that. But yeah, that rough outer material, that might be a good way to show that he's different than the others. He was much earlier made. This is why we brainstorm. You never know what you might find out. Yeah, it's those baselines for the stories, or rather what I want to create the character for, that kind of dictates whether or not I enjoy them. And don't get me wrong, I really enjoy most of the villains I've made for the Ivar comics as of this far, but some of them have really just kind of hit home or had felt like they truly add to the overall narrative rather than distract like some of the villains. Like Mermaid would be one I would consider a bit more distracting than actually building upon like these characters here. Now, she does play a big role eventually, but most of the time she's played off for shenanigans and gags, and that's personally where I like to keep her for now. Her story requires a little bit more setup than, say, Robert's here. And that's another thing to consider entirely when it comes to a character's design, is how they're presented to the audience. When it comes to Robert, I think he's a lot easier simply because he's more cartoonish and more fun. And he doesn't require a lot of setup to truly get to understand him or see where his story is coming from. Whereas Mermaid's a bit more serious and dire, so it would require a whole comic in itself to truly know her as a character. Whereas you kind of get from Rob and Ted early on that they're just two people trying to make these childlike robots into the eventual conquerors of Hope Harbor. Let's draw that goggle. Yeah, I'm going to leave the background loose on this one as well, because I don't really know what's there, so I'm just going to draw like a tree line, maybe, just so I can get some idea what I'm looking at. And then some little squares to signify that there's some robots. Well, I think I would consider Rob more of the nerdy type character in these comics, especially with his dynamic with Ted. I personally think Ted's more of the voice of reason when it comes to these guys. He might be the only thing keeping Robert from going mentally insane. Because if Ted wasn't here, Robert would be speaking to these robots all day, and I don't see that ending really well on his end. Yeah, I hope to have more comics with these guys in the future, further explaining not only the dynamic of how these two met and how they work, but also kind of summarizing this robot obsession. We're almost done here. Just gotta get this page worked out. Time really does fly when you talk about lore. Actually, I might move him here. Again, see, this is why we do rough sketches. Is that I'm not really sure if I'm happy where Ted currently is. I think we shall move him. Actually, that is a very funny idea. He could honestly use the social interaction. Maybe he'll finally act right for once. Okay, since I did move these two characters, I'm gonna have to readjust them. Not adjust them, but their speech bubbles, I meant. Because now they're gonna be in the wrong place. You know, this is why we do sketches. So I can always change the story depending on what I need. That is what sane people do, Robert. They have normal conversations with people and not robots. They don't plot world domination. Draw some little squares. And now the last drawing of Robert for page 2. I believe this is a, let's see, 4, 5, 6, I think this is a 6-page comic. Actually, the first 6-page comic that I think I'll ever be drawing. I mean, that's not true. I technically drew a much larger comic some few years ago. Good question. What clothes does Rob wear? He's still really in the rough phase of design, but I kind of imagine him in almost that engineer type roughness where it's like a loose shirt, maybe a simple white button-up, and of course a little bit of inspiration off steampunk designs as well. It kind of looks like he never really left the workshop. He's still dressed for work. I'll have to redraw these goggles, so I'm just gonna slap them on him so I can see what he looks like. Another great example about how he doesn't get out much, though, is that he's still very much dressed for his robot endeavors. Alright, let's fix those speech bubbles. And then once I do this, we'll probably have to call it here. Yeah, these are too big, so I'm going to shrink it. Whoops, don't want the sketches. I want the speech bubble. Okay, so I didn't have to adjust too much because they're talking on 2 different screens. Yeah, one of the reasons why I had to adjust him had to do with the 180 rule. When you draw a comic, it's typically more correct to have your characters facing the same way on a camera. And if you were to turn that camera going 2 opposite ways, it won't make sense anymore. Let's take this shot down here with Rob standing behind him while Ted is turning on one of the robots. The shot right here, the way it was originally with Ted on this side, would have been flipping the camera, because now all of a sudden we're facing his direction. What I changed it into now just looks like the camera turned over on its side instead of going all the way to the other person. And I think it helps be a little bit more clear visually. Gives it this flow that I prefer. And yeah, that would be the first 2 sketches. We seem to have run out of time, though. It was very good seeing all of you, and I really enjoyed this conversation, getting to sit down and talk a little bit about character lore. Thank you so much for watching. But as always, keep making stories, and I will see you in the next stream. Bye!